The starship EOS descended slowly through the thick layers of Earth's atmosphere. It moved silently, its sleek silver surface glowing faintly as it caught the dim light of the sun. The ship was not large, but it carried a crew of 5 people who had been chosen carefully for this mission. Their task was simple on paper, to find out why humans called their own planet a death world. But as the ship neared the surface, the weight of the mission began to settle over them. None of them knew what they would find down there, and that uncertainty made the air inside the ship tense. Captain Lavra Hayes stood at the front of the control room, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the console. She was a tall woman with short brown hair and sharp green eyes that always seemed to be searching for something. Her face was calm, but anyone who knew her well could see the flicker of worry in her expression. This wasn't just another routine exploration mission. Earth was different. Something about it unsettled everyone, even before they arrived. Behind her, Dr. Ryan Carter sat hunched over his instruments, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he analyzed data streaming in from the planet below. He was younger than most of the others, barely into his 30s, but his mind worked faster than anyone else's. His dark curly hair stuck up in odd directions as if he'd been running his hands through it all morning. He muttered under his breath as he worked, his voice low and steady. "Radiation levels are higher than expected," he said finally, glancing up at Lava. "Not enough to be dangerous to us, but strange. This planet should have recovered by now." Lavra nodded but didn't say anything. She trusted Ryan's judgment. He was one of the best xenobiologists in the fleet. But she wanted to see things for herself first. Data could only tell part of the story. Lieutenant Emma Blake leaned against the wall near the door, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She was shorter than the others, with blonde hair pulled back into a tight ponytail and piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. As the ship's security officer, it was her job to make sure everyone stayed safe, and she took that responsibility seriously. Her hand rested casually on the weapon strapped to her side, though she doubted she'd need it here. Still, old habits died hard. Dr. Alan Park stood quietly in the corner, his glasses perched precariously on the tip of his nose as he flipped through pages on a tablet. He was older than the rest of the team, with streaks of gray in his black hair and lines etched deeply into his face. He had spent decades studying alien cultures, but Earth was unlike anything he'd ever encountered. There was so much information. Available records, artifacts, even stories passed down through generations, but none of it added up. Why would a species capable of such incredible achievements also destroy itself so completely? Commander Jake Miller stood near the window, staring out at the approaching planet. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a strong jawline and close-cropped hair that gave him a military look. Despite his imposing appearance, he was thoughtful and deliberate, always weighing every decision carefully. Right now, he looked troubled. "This place gives me the creeps," he said without turning around. His voice was deep and calm, but there was an edge to it that betrayed his unease. "Something feels wrong," no one disagreed. Even though they hadn't set foot on the planet yet, there was an undeniable sense of foreboding hanging over them. Earth was beautiful from space, with its swirling clouds and vast oceans, but up close, it was clear that something terrible had happened here. The scars were everywhere in the cracked landscapes, the empty cities, the silence that seemed to stretch endlessly. Finally, the ship touched down in what appeared to be a flat, open area surrounded by ruins. The engines powered down with a soft hum, and for a moment no one moved. They simply stood there, listening to the quiet that filled the cabin. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet you might expect from an uninhabited planet. It was heavy, almost suffocating, like the world itself was holding its breath. Lavra broke the silence first. "All right, team, let's gear up and head outside. Stay alert, we don't know what we're walking into." Everyone nodded and began preparing for the excursion. They suited up quickly, checking their equipment one last time before stepping out onto the surface. When the hatch opened, a rush of cool air swept into the ship, carrying with it the faint smell of decay. Lavra stepped out first, followed closely by the others. They stood together for a moment, taking in their surroundings. The ground beneath their feet was dry and cracked, covered in a thin layer of dust that swirled lazily in the breeze. In the distance, jagged buildings loomed like skeletons, their broken windows staring blankly at the sky. Vines and weeds had begun to reclaim the structures, twisting their way through cracks and crevices. It was a haunting sight, both beautiful and tragic. Ryan knelt down to examine the soil, scooping up a handful and letting it sift through his fingers. "This isn't natural," he said after a moment. "Of the radiation I detected earlier, it's seeping into everything. Whatever caused this must have been catastrophic." Emma scanned the horizon, her hand still hovering near her weapon. "Do you think there's anyone left? Any survivors?" "I doubt it," Alan replied, adjusting his glasses. "Based on the records we've studied, humanity wiped itself out centuries ago. If anyone had survived, they would have rebuilt by now." Jake frowned, or maybe they didn't want to. The comment hung in the air, unspoken questions lingering between them. What kind of species would choose destruction over survival? Was it really possible for a civilization to collapse so completely, leaving behind nothing but ruins and echoes? As they started moving toward the nearest building, Lavra couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The silence around them was too perfect, too complete. It was as if the planet itself was watching them, waiting to see what they would do next. She glanced over her shoulder at her team, each of them focused on their tasks. But she couldn't help wondering if they felt it too, the sense that something was watching them from the shadows. They reached the entrance of the building and paused. The door was gone, reduced to rubble that lay scattered across the ground. Inside, the air was stale and thick with dust. Sunlight filtered through the broken windows, casting long shadows across the floor. The walls were covered in faded murals and graffiti, remnants of a culture that had once thrived here. Alan approached one of the murals, tilting his head as he studied it. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a series of images depicting scenes of war and destruction. "It's like they were obsessed with violence. Even their art reflects it." Emma shook her head. "Why would anyone glorify something like that? It doesn't make sense." "Maybe it wasn't about glory," Ryan suggested. "Maybe it was fear of losing control, of being weak." Humans were complicated creatures. Lavra turned away from the mural and walked deeper into the building. The floor creaked beneath her boots, and the sound echoed eerily in the empty space. She stopped when she saw something glinting in the corner, a small object half buried in the dirt. She bent down to pick it up, brushing off the dust to reveal a photograph. It showed a group of smiling people standing in front of a tree, their faces frozen in time. For a brief moment, she felt a pang of sadness. These were real people with lives and dreams and hopes. And now they were gone. She tucked the photograph into her pocket and rejoined the others. "Let's keep moving," she said. "We need to gather as much information as we can." As they continued exploring, the sense of unease grew stronger. Every step felt heavier, every shadow darker. The building seemed endless, its corridors twisting and turning in ways that didn't make sense. It was as if the structure itself was alive, shifting and changing to confuse them. Then, suddenly, Ryan froze. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Everyone stopped and listened. At first, there was nothing but the sound of their breathing. Then faintly they heard a soft rustling, like leaves brushing against each other. But there was no wind. "We're not alone," Jake said, his voice low and steady. Before anyone could respond, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was humanoid, but its features were indistinct, blurred as if it existed somewhere between reality and imagination. Its eyes glowed faintly, and it moved with an unnatural grace, floating rather than walking. For a moment, no one spoke. They simply stared at the figure, unsure of what to do. Then, with a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, it spoke. "You seek answers," it said. "But are you prepared for the truth?" Lavra stepped forward cautiously. "Who are you?" she asked. The figure tilted its head, studying her with those glowing eyes. "We are the custodians," it replied. "And we have watched your kind since your arrival. Tell us, why do you wish to understand the fate of humanity?" Lavra hesitated. then straightened her shoulders. Because we need to know. If Earth truly is a death world, we need to understand why. So we can learn from their mistakes. The custodian regarded her silently for a moment, then nodded. Very well. Follow. Without waiting for a response, it turned and floated down the corridor, disappearing into the shadows. The team exchanged uneasy glances but followed, their hearts pounding in their chests. Whatever awaited them, they knew one thing for certain. The truth about Earth and humanity was far more terrifying than any of them had imagined. The team followed the custodian cautiously, their footsteps echoing softly in the dimly lit corridor. The air grew colder as they moved deeper into the building, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, swallowing the light from their handheld lamps. Lavra kept her eyes fixed on the glowing figure ahead of them, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling crawling up her spine. She couldn't shake the sense that they were being led somewhere important, somewhere dangerous, behind her. Ryan whispered to Emma, his voice barely audible. Do you think it's safe to trust this thing? What if it's trying to trick us? Emma tightened her grip on her weapon but didn't take it out. I don't know, she admitted. But we don't have much choice. If we want answers, we have to follow. Jake brought up the rear, his sharp eyes scanning the walls and ceiling for any signs of movement. He didn't like this. Something about the custodian felt wrong. It wasn't hostile, not exactly, but there was an emptiness to it, as if it lacked any real emotion or intent. He couldn't decide if that made it more trustworthy or less. The custodian stopped suddenly, turning to face them. Its glowing eyes flickered faintly, and for a moment, it looked almost human, almost, you wonder why Earth became a death world. It said, its voice resonating in their minds rather than their ears. But the truth is far simpler and far more complex than you imagine. Lavra stepped forward, her voice steady despite the knot of unease in her stomach. Then tell us, why did humanity destroy itself? The custodian tilted its head, as if considering how best to answer. Humans called Earth a death world because they failed to see the truth. This planet did not kill them, they killed themselves. Alan frowned, his fingers tightening around the tablet he carried. That doesn't make sense. Every species makes mistakes. Why couldn't they recover? Because their mistakes were not small, the custodian replied. They were vast. They consumed resources faster than they could replenish them. They poisoned the air, the water, the soil. And when they turned on each other, they did so with weapons capable of ending all life many times over. Ryan knelt down to examine a patch of cracked concrete on the floor, his mind racing. So it wasn't just one thing, it was everything. Environmental collapse, war, disease, all at once. Yes, the custodian confirmed. And yet, even as they destroyed their world, they clung to hope. Some tried to change, to rebuild. But those voices were drowned out by others who refused to let go of power, wealth, and fear. Emma crossed her arms, her expression skeptical. If they had people fighting for peace, why didn't they win? Why didn't the good guys prevail? There were no good guys, the custodian said simply, only humans. Flawed, conflicted, and driven by desires they could not control. The group fell silent, absorbing the weight of the custodian's words. It was hard to imagine a species so divided, so unwilling or unable to work together. Even in their own history, they had seen examples of cooperation and sacrifice. How could humanity have been so different? Jake broke the silence, his voice low and thoughtful. It sounds like they were doomed from the start, like they couldn't help themselves. That is not entirely accurate, the custodian replied. They had potential, great potential. But they chose poorly again and again until their choices left them with no way out. As they continued walking, the custodian led them into a large chamber that opened up before them like the mouth of a cave. The walls were covered in strange symbols and patterns that glowed faintly in the darkness. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it rested a crystalline object that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light. What is this place? Lavra asked, her voice tinged with awe. This is a record, the custodian explained. A memory of what once was. Touch it and you will see. Lavra hesitated, glancing back at her team. They exchanged uncertain looks, but no one objected. Slowly, she approached the pedestal and reached out to touch the crystal. The moment her fingers brushed against its surface, a surge of energy coursed through her, and the room dissolved into light. When the brightness faded, Lavra found herself standing in the middle of a bustling city. The air was alive with noise, cars honking, people talking, music playing from unseen speakers. Skyscrapers towered above her, their glass facades reflecting the golden light of the sun. For a moment she forgot where she was, caught up in the vibrancy of it all. But then she noticed something odd. The people around her moved quickly, their faces tense and distracted. Billboards flashed messages about war, climate disasters, and economic collapse. The sky above was hazy, tinged with an unnatural orange glow. This wasn't the idyllic scene she had expected. It was chaotic, overwhelming, and deeply unsettling. Ryan appeared beside her, looking around with wide eyes. "Is this Earth, before everything went wrong?" "I think so," Lavra replied, her voice barely above a whisper. This must be what it was like during their final days. As they wandered through the streets, invisible to the people around them, they began to piece together fragments of the story. They saw scientists warning about rising temperatures and dwindling resources, only to be ignored or ridiculed. They saw politicians arguing over trivial matters while ignoring the bigger picture. They saw ordinary people struggling to survive, torn between fear and hopelessness. Emma joined them, her face pale. "This is insane." They knew what was happening, and they still did nothing. "It's not that simple," Alan said, shaking his head. "Look closer. There are protests, movements, people trying to make a difference, but they're outnumbered, drowned out by greed and apathy." Jake clenched his fists, his jaw tight. "So they just gave up? Let themselves be destroyed?" "No," the custodian's voice echoed around them, pulling them back to the present. "They fought until the very end, but their efforts came too late. By the time they realized the depth of their mistakes, the damage was irreversible." The vision faded, and the team found themselves back in the chamber, standing in front of the glowing crystal. Lavra took a step back, her heart pounding. She felt shaken, as if she had lived through those moments herself. Ryan ran a hand through his hair, his brow furrowed. "What happened after that? After the collapse?" "The survivors scattered," the custodian replied. "Some fled underground, others to distant colonies. But without their home planet, they lost their identity. Their culture, their unity, it crumbled along with their world." Alan sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping. "And now there's nothing left." "No trace of them except these ruins." "Not quite," the custodian corrected. "There are echoes, fragments of their existence, preserved in art, in technology, and stories passed down through generations. But they are shadows, remnants of what once was." Emma frowned, her arms still crossed tightly over her chest. "So what's the point of showing us all this? Are you just trying to scare us?" "No," the custodian said. "We are showing you because you must understand. Humanity's fate is not unique. It is a pattern repeated across countless worlds. Intelligence alone does not guarantee survival. Compassion, restraint, and cooperation are equally vital." Jake nodded slowly, his expression grim. "And if we don't learn from their mistakes, we'll end up the same way." The custodian did not respond directly. Instead, it turned and floated toward the far side of the chamber, where another doorway waited. "Come," it said. "There is more to see." The team exchanged hesitant glances, but followed nonetheless. As they stepped through the doorway, they entered a narrow hallway lined with holographic displays. Each one showed a different moment in human history: a child laughing, a family gathered around a table, a scientist working late into the night. These images were interspersed with darker scenes of destruction: cities burning, oceans rising, skies darkened by ash. Ryan stopped in front of one display, his breath catching in his throat. It showed a group of people planting trees in a barren wasteland, their faces etched with determination. "They weren't all bad," he murmured. "Some of them really tried. Yes, the custodian agreed. But their efforts were isolated, fragmented, they lacked the unity needed to turn the tide. Lavra felt a lump rise in her throat. As she watched another display, this one showing a mother holding her child close as flames engulfed their home. How could they let it get this far? She whispered. Because they were afraid, the custodian replied. Afraid of change, of loss of each other. Fear drove them apart, and in the end it consumed them. As they reached the end of the hallway, the custodian stopped and turned to face them once more. You have seen enough, it said. Now, it is your choice. Will you carry this knowledge back to your people, or will you forget it as so many others have? Lavra straightened her shoulders, her resolve hardening. We won't forget, she said firmly. We'll make sure everyone hears this story. We can't let it happen again. The custodian nodded, its glowing eyes dimming slightly. Then, go, share what you have learned. Perhaps your kind will succeed where humanity failed. With that, the custodian disappeared, leaving the team alone in the hallway. For a moment, no one spoke. They simply stood there, processing everything they had seen and heard. The weight of the mission pressed down on them, heavier than ever before. Finally, Jake broke the silence. Let's head back to the ship. We've got a lot to think about. The others nodded, and together they made their way back through the ruins, their steps slower and more deliberate than Beth. The journey back to the Intergalactic Council headquarters felt longer than it actually was. The ship hummed steadily as it moved through the vast emptiness of space. But inside, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Each member of the team sat in silence, their minds replaying the events on Earth, the ruins, the custodian's words and the haunting visions they had witnessed. Lavra kept her eyes fixed on the navigation screen, though she wasn't really looking at it. Her thoughts were elsewhere, tangled in the web of humanity's rise and fall. Ryan broke the quiet first. He leaned forward in his seat, rubbing his temples as if trying to ease a headache. I can't stop thinking about those people, he said softly. The ones we saw in the vision. They weren't so different from us. No, Alan agreed, adjusting his glasses. They were curious, creative, capable of incredible things. But that same drive also led them to ruin. Emma glanced over at him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. It's hard to believe they couldn't see what was happening right in front of them. How could they ignore all the warnings? They didn't ignore them, Jake replied, his voice low and thoughtful. At least not everyone did. Some tried to fix things, but they were outnumbered, drowned out by louder voices. Lavra turned away from the console and looked at her team. That's what scares me the most. It wasn't just one group or one decision that caused everything to collapse. It was everyone, all of them working against each other instead of together. Alan nodded slowly. And now we have to figure out how to make sure that doesn't happen to us. The weight of that responsibility settled over them, like a blanket, suffocating and unavoidable. None of them spoke for a while, lost in their own thoughts. The EOS continued its steady course, the stars outside streaking past in long ribbons of light. When they finally arrived at the council headquarters, a massive floating structure orbiting a distant star, they were greeted by a delegation of officials waiting anxiously for their report. Lavra stepped off the ship first, followed closely by her team. The council members surrounded them almost immediately, firing questions before they even had a chance to catch their breath. What did you find? One of them asked, his tone urgent. Did you discover why humans called Earth a death world? Lavra held up a hand, signaling for calm. We found more than we expected, she said carefully. But it's complicated. The council leader, an older man named Senator Grayson, gestured for them to follow him into a large meeting room. Once inside, he closed the doors firmly behind them and took his seat at the head of the table. Tell us everything, he said. His sharp eyes fixed on Lavra. Lavra took a deep breath and began recounting their mission, starting with the desolate landscape of Earth, the strange custodians who had appeared, and the visions they had been shown. As she spoke, the council members listened intently, their faces growing darker with each revelation. Ryan, Emma, Alan, and Jake added details when necessary, painting a vivid picture of humanity's self-destruction. When they finished, the room fell silent. No one moved, no one spoke. Finally, Senator Grayson leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "So this is what happened to them," he murmured. "They destroyed themselves because they couldn't work together." "It wasn't just that," Alan interjected. "They had opportunities to change, to fix things, but they kept making the same mistakes over and over again. Greed, fear, hatred, it consumed them. And now there's nothing left," another council member said quietly. "No survivors, no hope of rebuilding." "Not entirely true," Ryan corrected. "There are echoes of their existence still out there, in their art, their technology, their stories, fragments of who they were. But the lesson is clear: intelligence alone isn't enough. If we don't learn to cooperate, to prioritize the greater good, we'll end up the same way." Senator Grayson nodded slowly, his fingers drumming against the table. "This changes everything," he said. "We've always assumed that progress meant advancement, better technology, faster ships, more resources. But if humanity's downfall teaches us anything, it's that survival requires something deeper than that." Emma shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "What do we do now? How do we prevent this from happening to us?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Senator Grayson replied. He stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the stars beyond. "For centuries, we've focused on expansion, colonizing new planets, exploring unknown territories. But maybe it's time to focus inward, to strengthen our unity, to ensure that every voice is heard, not just the loudest ones." Lavra exchanged a glance with Jake, who gave her a small nod of encouragement. She cleared her throat and spoke up. "If I may, sir, I think the key lies in education. We need to teach our people about Earth not just as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder of what's possible when we work together." "She's right," Alan added. Humanity showed flashes of brilliance, moments of compassion and cooperation. We need to highlight those as examples of what we should strive for. Senator Grayson turned back to face them, his expression softening slightly. "Then that's where we'll start. Captain Hayes, your team will lead the effort to compile a comprehensive report on Earth and present it to the Council. From there, we'll develop programs to educate our people and foster greater unity across the galaxy." The team nodded, though the enormity of the task ahead weighed heavily on them. They knew it wouldn't be easy. Changing the mindset of an entire civilization was no small feat, but they also knew it was necessary. Over the next several weeks, the team worked tirelessly to document everything they had learned. Ryan analyzed the data they had collected during their visit to Earth, piecing together timelines and patterns that highlighted humanity's critical mistakes. Alan sifted through historical records and cultural artifacts, searching for lessons that could be applied to their own society. Emma and Jake reviewed security protocols and conflict resolution strategies, looking for ways to prevent similar breakdowns in the future. And Lavra coordinated their efforts, ensuring that every detail was included in their final report. As they worked, they began to notice subtle changes within themselves. Conversations that might have turned heated before were now approached with patience and understanding. Decisions were made collectively rather than individually, with input from everyone involved. Even small acts of kindness became more common: a shared meal, a helping hand, a moment of gratitude. One evening, as they gathered in the ship's common area to review their progress, Ryan looked around at his teammates and smiled. "You know, maybe we're already starting to get it right." Lavra raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean, look at us. We're working together, listening to each other, supporting each other. Isn't that exactly what we're trying to teach everyone else?" Emma chuckled softly. "Yeah, but don't jinx it. We've still got a long way to go." Jake leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms above his head. "True, but if we can keep doing this, if we can stay united, then maybe we really can avoid ending up like Earth." Alan nodded, his eyes gleaming with determination. "And if we succeed, humanity's story won't just be a warning, it'll be a catalyst for change." Lavra smiled faintly, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time since they'd returned from Earth. "Let's make sure of it," she said. "One step at a time." The day of the presentation finally arrived. The council chamber was packed with representatives from across the galaxy, all eager to hear what the team had discovered. Lavra stood at the podium, her heart pounding. As she scanned the sea of faces before her, she took a deep breath and began speaking, her voice steady and clear. Earth was once a thriving planet home to a species capable of extraordinary achievements. But it became a death world not because of external threats, but because of internal divisions. Humanity's downfall serves as a powerful reminder that survival depends not just on intelligence, but on compassion, restraint, and unity. She paused, letting her words sink in. Behind her, holographic projections displayed images of Earth's beauty and devastation side by side. The contrast was stark, unforgettable. We owe it to ourselves and to the memory of those who came before us to learn from their mistakes, to build a future where cooperation triumphs over conflict, where hope outweighs fear. When she finished, the room erupted into applause. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was genuine, heartfelt approval. For the first time, Lavra felt confident that their message had been heard. As the crowd dispersed, Senator Grayson approached her, his expression warm. "You've done well, Captain Hayes, better than I could have hoped." "Thank you, sir," she replied, "but this is only the beginning. There's still so much work to do." He nodded, "Indeed, and you'll have the Council's full support every step of the way." With that, he turned and left, leaving Lavra standing alone in the center of the chamber. She glanced down at the photograph she had taken from Earth, the smiling faces, frozen in time, and felt a renewed sense of purpose. Humanity's story was tragic, yes, but it was also a call to action. A reminder that the choices they made today would shape the galaxy tomorrow. As she walked out of the chamber, joining her team in the hallway, she couldn't help but feel optimistic. The road ahead would be challenging, but they were ready. Together, they would honor Earth's legacy not as a death world, but as a beacon of hope. The weeks that followed the presentation to the Intergalactic Council were a whirlwind of activity. The team's report on Earth had sparked widespread discussion across the galaxy, and requests for more information poured in from every corner. Leaders, scientists, and ordinary citizens wanted to know more about humanity's story, not just the tragic parts, but also the moments of brilliance and hope. Lavra and her crew found themselves at the center of it all, giving interviews, hosting lectures, and answering endless questions. At first, the attention was overwhelming. Ryan struggled to keep up with the flood of data requests, while Alan spent long hours organizing cultural exhibits to showcase humanity's achievements. Emma and Jake worked tirelessly to ensure the team's safety as they traveled from one planet to another, addressing crowds that sometimes numbered in the thousands, and Lavra, she carried the weight of it all on her shoulders, making sure every detail was handled with care. Despite the chaos, there was a sense of purpose that kept them going. Every lecture, every exhibit, every conversation felt like a step toward something bigger, a chance to reshape their society before it was too late. But even as they worked, doubts lingered in the back of their minds. Would their efforts be enough? Or would the same old patterns of greed, fear, and division creep back in? One evening, after a particularly grueling day of presentations, the team gathered in the common area of their temporary quarters. They sat around a small table, sipping drinks and letting the quiet settle over them. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars against the dark sky. "I don't think I've ever been this tired," Ryan admitted, slumping back in his chair. "But it's worth it, right? All these people actually seem to care." "They do," Lavra replied, though her voice carried a note of caution. "But caring isn't enough. We need action, real, lasting change." Emma nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "Change is hard, though. Even when people want it, they don't always know how to make it happen." "That's why we're here," Jake said firmly. "To show them how?" "To remind them that unity isn't just some lofty ideal, it's necessary." Alan adjusted his glasses, his expression thoughtful. "And yet, even with all our efforts, there are still voices pushing back. Some people think we're exaggerating the threat, that humanity's downfall won't happen to us." Lavra sighed, rubbing her temples. "Of course there are doubters, There always will be. But we can't let that stop us. If anything, it means we have to work harder. Ryan leaned forward, his brow furrowed. What worries me most is that we might lose sight of what really matters. It's easy to get caught up in the details, the politics, the logistics, and forget why we started this in the first place. You're right, Lavra said softly. We can't let that happen. No matter how busy we get, we have to remember. The lessons we learned on Earth, humanity didn't fail because they lacked intelligence or resources. They failed because they lost sight of each other. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed her words. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Emma stood up abruptly, pacing across the room. So what do we do? She asked, turning to face the group. How do we keep ourselves grounded? We stick together, Jake answered without hesitation. Just like we've been doing. If we stay united, we can handle whatever comes our way. Alan smiled faintly. And maybe that's the real lesson here. It's not just about teaching others, it's about living those values ourselves. Lavra nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. Exactly, we're not just messengers, we're examples. If we can show people what cooperation looks like, maybe they'll follow suit. The next morning, the team received an unexpected invitation. Senator Grayson had arranged for them to visit a newly established research facility dedicated to studying Earth's legacy. The facility was located on a remote moon, far from the distractions of populated planets, and it housed a vast collection of artifacts recovered from the ruins of human civilization. The senator hoped that by immersing themselves in humanity's history, the team could gain fresh insights into how to prevent similar mistakes in the future. When they arrived, they were greeted by Dr. Evelyn Carter, the facility's director. She was a tall, elegant woman with silver-streaked hair and piercing blue eyes. Her demeanor was calm but commanding, and she wasted no time getting down to business. "Welcome," she said, shaking each of their hands in turn. "I understand. You've already done incredible work spreading awareness about Earth. Now I'd like to take it a step further. Here, you'll have access to everything we've uncovered so far, artifacts, documents, recordings. My hope is that you'll find new ways to connect with people, to inspire them to act." Lavra thanked her, her curiosity piqued. "This is amazing. We couldn't have asked for a better opportunity." Dr. Carter led them through the facility, showing them rooms filled with relics from humanity's past. There were paintings, sculptures, musical instruments, and tools of all kinds. In one chamber, holographic displays recreated scenes of daily life, allowing visitors to experience what it might have been like to walk the streets of an ancient human city. In another, rows of shelves held books and digital files containing stories, poems, and scientific discoveries as they explored. Ryan stopped in front of a display case containing a simple wooden Toya-carved animal figure, worn smooth by years of use. He stared at it for a long time, his expression unreadable. Finally, he turned to the others. "This is what gets me," he said quietly. "They weren't monsters, they were just people who loved, laughed, dreamed. And now they're gone." "It's humbling," Alan agreed, "to see how much they created, how much they left behind. And yet, none of it was enough to save them." Emma frowned, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Do you think they knew? At the end, I mean. Do you think they realized what they were losing?" "Some of them must have," Jake replied. "But knowing isn't the same as changing. They saw the warning signs, but they couldn't or wouldn't act fast enough." Lavra stepped closer to the display case, her gaze fixed on the tiny toy. "That's why we have to act now, before it's too late." Over the next few days, the team delved deeper into the artifacts, piecing together fragments of humanity's story. They discovered letters written by parents to their children, describing hopes for a brighter future. They listened to recordings of songs sung during times of hardship, their melodies hauntingly beautiful. They read journals detailing struggles and triumphs, fears and dreams. Each item added another layer to the portrait of a species that had been both extraordinary and deeply flawed. One afternoon, as they sifted through a pile of documents, Ryan stumbled upon something unexpected, a journal belonging to a scientist who had lived during humanity's final days. The entries were brief but poignant. capturing the writer's growing despair as the world around them crumbled. They knew, Ryan murmured, flipping through the pages. This person knew exactly what was happening, and they tried to warn others, but no one listened. Lavra leaned over his shoulder, reading along with him. What does it say? Ryan cleared his throat and began reading aloud. Day 327, another meeting today. More arguments, more excuses, no solutions. Sometimes. I wonder if anyone truly cares about what's coming. The storms are worse now, the crops failing, the oceans rising, and still, they cling to their power, their wealth. How can they not see that it's meaningless if there's nothing left to protect? He paused, his voice trembling slightly. It goes on like this for pages, describing floods, fires, famines, talking about protests and movements that never gained traction, until finally, his voice trailed off as he flipped to the last entry, day 450. I don't think we'll make it, not this time. Maybe someday someone will learn from our mistakes. Maybe they'll do better. All I can do now is write this down and hope it survives longer than I will. The room fell silent as the weight of the words settled over them. Lavra reached out and placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder. This is why we're here, she said softly. To honor their hope. To prove that their sacrifices weren't in vain. Ryan nodded, blinking back tears. Yeah, let's make sure of it. By the end of their visit, the team had compiled a treasure trove of stories and insights to share with the galaxy. They planned to incorporate these findings into their ongoing education campaign, using personal narratives to drive home the importance of unity and cooperation. But as they prepared to leave the facility, Lavra couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced around the empty hallway, her heart pounding. Does anyone else feel like something's off? Emma frowned, her hand instinctively moving toward her weapon. Now that you mention it, yeah, it's been weirdly quiet since we got here. Before anyone could respond, a low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Then, without warning, the ground beneath their feet shuddered violently. What's happening? Jake shouted, bracing himself against a nearby wall. I don't know, Dr. Carter called out, rushing toward them. This has never happened before. Suddenly, a section of the ceiling collapsed, revealing a swirling vortex of energy above them. From within the vortex emerged figures, dozens of them, translucent and glowing, their forms shifting and shimmering like liquid light. The custodians, one of them floated closer, its voice resonating in their minds. The team boarded the EOS, their thoughts heavy with the custodian's cryptic message. Lavra sat in the pilot's seat, her hands resting lightly on the controls as she stared out at the swirling stars beyond the viewport. The others gathered around, their faces reflecting a mix of determination and unease. What did they mean? Ryan asked finally, breaking the silence. You must become the change you seek. What does that even look like? It's not about words anymore? Lavra replied, her voice firm but calm. It's about action. We've been telling people what went wrong on Earth, showing them the mistakes humanity made. But now we need to show them how to avoid those mistakes ourselves. Jake nodded slowly, leaning back against the wall. So it's not just about teaching, it's about leading, setting an example. Exactly, Lavra said. If we want others to unite, to prioritize the greater good, then we have to live those values every day. Starting right now? Emma crossed her arms, her expression thoughtful. But where do we start? There's so much to do, so many systems and cultures to reach. Alan adjusted his glasses, his eyes gleaming with quiet resolve. We don't have to fix everything at once. We focus on one step at a time. One community, one planet, one conversation. That's how real change happens. Lavra smiled faintly, feeling a flicker of hope amidst the uncertainty. Then let's get started. Their first stop was a small colony on the edge of the galaxy, a struggling settlement trying to rebuild after a devastating natural disaster. The colonists were divided, arguing over resources and leadership, unable to work together effectively. When the team arrived, they found the atmosphere tense. With tempers flaring and mistrust running high, Lavra stepped off the ship first, followed closely by the others. A group of colonists approached cautiously, some glaring, others looking wary. A man with graying hair and tired eyes stepped forward, introducing himself as Governor Harris. "We weren't expecting visitors," he said gruffly. "What do you want?" "We're here to help," Lavra replied simply. "We heard about your situation and thought maybe we could offer some guidance," Harris scoffed, shaking his head. "Guidance won't solve our problems. We need food, water, shelter, not lectures." "It's not a lecture," Jake interjected, his tone steady. "It's a chance to find common ground, to figure out how to move forward together instead of tearing each other apart." The governor hesitated, glancing at the rest of the group. Finally, he sighed and gestured for them to follow him into the main hall. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Colonists sat in scattered groups, glaring at one another across makeshift tables. Voices rose and fell in heated arguments, accusations flying back and forth. Ryan stepped forward, raising his hands to get everyone's attention. "Listen up," he called out, his voice cutting through the noise. Slowly, the room grew quieter, as all eyes turned to him. "We know you're facing tough challenges, but fighting each other isn't going to make things better. It's only going to make them worse." A young woman stood up, her face flushed with anger. "Easy for you to say you're not the one starving or freezing at night." "You're right," Emma said, stepping beside Ryan. "We're not. But we've seen what happens when people turn against each other instead of working together. And trust me, it's not pretty." Lavra took a deep breath and addressed the crowd. "We're not here to tell you what to do. We're here to remind you that you're stronger together than you are apart. Every argument, every act of selfishness pushes you further from finding solutions. So let's try something different. Let's listen to each other. Really listen." For a moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, a man near the back raised his hand. "What if we can't agree? What if someone takes more than their share?" "That, where trust comes in," Alan said gently. "And trust starts with small steps. Share what you can and hold each other accountable. If someone slips up, don't lash out. Work it out. It's not easy, but it's possible." The room fell silent. Again, the weight of their words sinking in. Finally, Governor Harris stood up, his shoulders squared. "All right," he said gruffly. "Let's give it a shot. But if this doesn't work, I'm holding you responsible." Lavra nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Fair enough." Over the next few days, the team worked closely with the colonists, helping them establish systems for sharing resources and resolving conflicts peacefully. They held meetings where everyone had a chance to speak, encouraging open dialogue and mutual understanding. At first, progress was slow and frustrating. Old grievances surfaced, tempers flared, and setbacks occurred. But gradually something began to shift. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the settlement, Lavra walked through the streets with Jake. The air felt lighter somehow, less charged with hostility. Groups of colonists sat together around fires, laughing and talking. Children played nearby, their laughter ringing out into the cool night. "I think it's working," Jake said softly, a hint of pride in his voice. "They're starting to come around." "They're learning," Lavra corrected. "Just like we are. It's not perfect, but it's a start." As the weeks passed, the team traveled to other colonies and planets, spreading their message of unity and cooperation. Each place presented its own unique challenges: economic inequality, cultural divides, environmental crises, but the underlying lesson remained the same. Survival depended on working together. Back on the EOS, they reviewed their progress during long journeys between destinations. Ryan compiled data on the changes they'd sparked, noting improvements in resource distribution, conflict resolution, and overall morale. Emma kept detailed logs of security incidents, pleased to see a steady decline in violence. Alan documented stories of individuals who had embraced the new mindset, using their experiences to inspire others, but it was Lavra who carried the emotional weight of it all. She spent hours staring out at the stars, thinking about Earth and the lessons they had learned there. Humanity's story was tragic, yes, but it was also a gift, a reminder of what was possible when people chose fear over hope. One night, as the ship drifted silently through space, Lavar joined the others in the common area. They sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Ryan broke the quiet. "Do you think we're making a difference?" he asked, his voice tinged with doubt. "Or are we just delaying the inevitable?" "We're making a difference," Lavar replied without hesitation. "Maybe not everywhere, maybe not forever. But every life we touch, every community we strengthen, that's a victory, and victories add up." Jake leaned forward, his expression serious. "But what about us? Are we becoming the change we're trying to create?" Lavra smiled faintly, meeting his gaze. "Yes, look at us. We're not perfect, but we're learning, we're growing. That's what matters." Emma nodded, her usual skepticism softened by a rare moment of optimism. "And if we keep going, if we stay united, maybe we'll prove the custodians wrong, maybe we'll break the pattern." Alan chuckled softly, adjusting his glasses. "Or maybe we'll rewrite it, create a new story for the galaxy." The room fell silent again, the enormity of their mission settling over them. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Lavra stood up, her voice steady and clear. "Whatever happens next, we face it together. That's the promise we made to ourselves, to each other, and to the memory of Earth, and that's a promise we'll keep." As the ship continued its journey through the stars, the team felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, filled with challenges they couldn't yet imagine, but they knew one thing for certain: they were ready. Together, they would honor Earth's legacy not as a death world, but as a beacon of hope.